Google is the light and the savior. Google is morally unblemished. Google will lead us to the promised land.
The few, the brave, the bitchy, once more wading into battle against the froggy hordes with Rant Zerker number 89. Google will save us from evil. Okay. And if you're listening now, I got a shill, and you want to support our efforts, up on the left or right-hand side, up there, you can go to feedthebadger.com and throw a few shekels in the hat.
Reply to public response and misrepresentation. I value diversity and inclusion, am not denying that sexism exists, and don't endorse using stereotypes. When addressing the gap in representation in the population, we need to look at population-level differences in distributions. If we can't have an honest discussion about this, then we can never truly solve the problem. Psychological safety is built on mutual respect and acceptance, but unfortunately our culture of shaming and misrepresentation is disrespectful and unaccepting of anyone outside its echo chamber. Despite what the public response seems to have been, I've gotten many personal messages from fellow Googlers expressing their gratitude for bringing up these very important issues which they agree with, but would never have the courage to say or defend because of our shaming culture and the possibility of being fired. This needs to change. Absolutely. Any comments?
And then he gets fired.
Yeah.
And then he gets fired.
Of course he did.
I was like,
right?
I was actually chuckling.
I have a question, though. He says, if we can't have an honest discussion about this, then we can never truly solve the problem. My question is this really a problem?
Well, okay, he's acknowledging, because he said right at the start, he is not denying that sexism doesn't exist, that sexism exists, right? So, and I assume he's not denying that racism exists, right? And if they do, then those are problems, right? And if they do and they affect people's ability to have equal opportunity, that's a problem. I would agree that that's a problem. I think he would agree that that's a problem. And it's a problem that needs to be addressed if and where it exists, right? So I think that's what he's getting at there. The TLDR of this memo is, in bullet points, 1. Google's political bias has equated the freedom from offense with psychological safety, but shaming into silence is the antithesis of psychological safety. 2. This silencing has created an ideological echo chamber where some ideas are too sacred to be honestly discussed. 3. The lack of discussion fosters the most extreme and authoritarian elements of this ideology. Extreme being all disparities in representation are due to oppression. Authoritarian being we should discriminate to correct for this oppression. 4. Differences in distributions of traits between men and women may in part explain why we don't have 50% representation of women in tech and leadership. And 5. Discrimination to reach equal representation is unfair, divisive, and bad for business.
I don't see an issue with this so far.
No, in fact,
with it.
I'm already seeing the work of Jordan Peterson here, of Jonathan Haidt, of you know, massive cross-cultural studies of 55 different countries with a sample size of hundreds of thousands. I'm seeing all kinds of work that I'm incredibly familiar with, because I've been studying it and looking at it for the last 8 years, right? So none of this, number one, none of this seems unbelievable to me, because I've read the research already that backs up all of these. And number two, this dude is definitely a Jordan Peterson fan, especially considering he actually went on Jordan Peterson's channel and did an interview. So he's pulling on the work of some seriously brilliant people. Jonathan Haidt, yep. Jordan Peterson. Because the first point, that's straight from Jonathan Haidt, right? And the other ones are, you know, right from Peterson. People generally have good intentions, but we all have biases which are invisible to us. Thankfully, open and honest discussion with those who disagree can highlight our blind spots and help us grow, which is why I wrote this document. Google has several biases, and honest discussion about these biases is being silenced by the dominant ideology. What follows is by no means the complete story, but it's a perspective that desperately needs to be told at Google. Again, very polite. Google's biases. At Google, we talk so much about unconscious bias as it applies to race and gender, but we rarely discuss our moral biases. This is where Jonathan Haidt comes in. Political orientation is actually a result of deep moral preferences and thus biases. Considering that the overwhelming majority of the social sciences, media, and Google lean left, we should critically examine these prejudices. Left biases would be compassion for the weak, disparities are due to injustices, humans are inherently cooperative. Right biases would be respect for the strong or for authority, disparities are natural and just, and humans are inherently competitive. And of course, both of those, all of those left biases and right biases, they're all necessary and applicable to humanity. I'm sorry, but they are. Change, on the left, change is good. Being open and being an idealist. On the right, change is dangerous. Being closed and being pragmatic. Mm-hmm. And all of those are necessary, too, to have a functioning society. It's like the strangest thing. Neither side is 100% correct, and both viewpoints are necessary for a functioning society. Or, in this case, company. A company too far to the right may be slow to react, overly hierarchical, and untrusting of others. In contrast, a company too far to the left will constantly be changing, deprecating much loved services.
Oh my fucking god! Oh, deprecating much love. Yes, Google listened. Oh wait, you fired him. You're not listening to this man.
Yeah. Over-diversify its interests, ignoring or being ashamed of its core business, and overly trust its employees and competitors. Only facts and reason can shed light on these biases, but when it comes to diversity and inclusion, Google's left bias has created a politically correct monoculture that maintains its hold by shaming dissenters into silence.
Or by firing them.
This silence removes any checks against encroaching extremist and authoritarian policies. For the rest of this document, I will concentrate on the extreme stance that all differences in outcome are due to differential treatment and the authoritarian element, pardon me, that's required to actually discriminate and create equal representation.
If there are real instances of racism and sexism and homophobia and so on, then we do consider those to be a problem, but we have to be able to find real examples. And in order to do that, we have to be honest about what is real discrimination versus what could be perceived as real discrimination, but in fact isn't. That way you can actually fix real problems.
Well, what I think too is I think, and I'll just sort of I'll put it this way, right? When you constantly are talking about how tech is sexist against women, right? Then and you are through your actions essentially demonstrating that tech is sexist against women, right? That it's a culture that is toxic to women. They're not welcome, right? They're going to have a hard time. Everything's going to be difficult. And part of what you're doing is having all of these programs to ameliorate that core problem of women not being welcome, not feeling welcome, women having a hard time, women being discriminated against, right? Mm-hmm. So you are not only saying that your company has a problem with sexism against women, but that your company has such a problem with sexism against women that it needs all of these programs to ameliorate that problem.
Right.
Right? What's the message that you're sending to women?
Yeah. Never mind the fact that there was a time period where there were a lot of women going into STEM.
Well, I mean, because you have to realize too that at that time there may have been fewer people in STEM. STEM might have been,
a brand new thing.
Well, it wasn't a brand new thing, but there may have been fewer people in it in general, right? Mm-hmm. And there were fewer people getting educated to the point where they could go into it. And now that we have so many more people being educated at the post-secondary level and having the choice to go into STEM, it's no longer, STEM is no longer just for people who are scientifically inclined, and that's it.
Right.
Right? And that's their only talent, and everywhere else they're impaired and they're impossible to live with, and they don't get along with others and the whole bit, right?
Yeah.
And so essentially, science may have been populated by the 10% of people who were autists back then, but now we need more people in science. There's more jobs in science, and so it's expanding beyond the autists. And female non-autistic people with the high math ability to achieve in science, that's required to achieve in science, they're more than twice as likely as men to also have high verbal ability.
Yeah.
And when they looked at both men and women and their choices, they found that for both men and women, if you had both strong math and strong verbal ability, you don't go into STEM. You choose something else. Why is that? Maybe because you find STEM boring. Maybe because everybody finds STEM boring, right? So maybe it's not a problem that women lack options. It's a problem that women have too many options because they have this extra set of skills and abilities that men are less likely to have.
Also, did we have things like gender studies and like, you know, interpretive dance theory and shit like that back then?
No,
I think that
not to the same degree.
College was more sort of focused, right? Like it was basically meant to put you in a specific kind of career, and it wasn't. The expectation before was that a high school education was more than enough for most people to get into the middle class. So college was like if you wanted to carry on and do something bigger. But now that college is basically is as expected as high school.
Yeah, in the 80s, it was about in the 80s, 70s and 80s that college, and this really fucking pissed me off when I was watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air one day, and, you know, Uncle Phil tells Will, you know, you don't go to college to find a job. You go to college to find yourself. And that was something that did not exist. That was a mindset that really did not exist in the culture up until, you know, until maybe the 1970s or the 80s, right? That was when college it started to be looked at as some kind of way of improving the self without necessarily, you know, or improving the sum of one's knowledge without necessarily having a career in mind or having it needing to have any kind of economic return on investment, right? So essentially, yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why the ratio of men to women in STEM has widened since the 80s.
This black and white thinking doesn't go anywhere good. And I'm actually constantly challenging myself to try to not say, sometimes I think people are driven by unconscious, instinctive, or biased behavior, but not to look at them and say, oh, they're deliberately trying to make the world a worse place. You know, and it's hard when I see this shit.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that Google thinks it's doing the right thing, and that's part of the problem. It thinks it's doing the right thing too much. The one thing I want to take from this is this. Google, you can't possibly be right about everything. It's possible that you could be fallible. And if you really think that you're infallible and you got it all figured out, that's when the shit starts to hit the fan.
What I found hilarious is, you know, the Danielle, who's their vice president of diversity and a bunch of other shit that sounds like it's from freaking 1984.
Yeah.
She said that, number one, I'm not going to link the memo for people to actually go and see and judge it for themselves, because I agree with the people who have complained that he is wrong. He has a whole bunch of wrong assumptions about gender. Okay. And which is just a statement of opinion, and it's essentially saying he's wrong, and it's not providing any kind of counter argument or counter evidence. And number two, she said, Google is unequivocal in our commitment to the path that we have chosen. So she essentially said that in the face of contrary evidence, we will remain on the path that we have chosen.
Oh my God.
And
Jesus. Spanish
and
Inquisition.
we are unequivocal in our commitment to the notion that we are correct to do so.
Yep.
Whoa. That is totally not what authoritarians that's not the thought process of authoritarians, because Google is absolutely fucking right. Google will save all of our souls. They'll save us all from evil. They are the one true path.
Yep.
I've always had a problem with people who use terms like good and evil. I think that Jordan Peterson uses them in a nuanced way. But most of the time when I hear the terms good and evil, I'm thinking like that's not a conversation that I want to be part of, because like I said, I am perfectly prepared to admit that we are we are just like one shade of gray better than chimps, right? Above chimps in what we're capable of, and how we the moral reasoning and the level of our behavior and all of this stuff, right? That doesn't mean that I hate people. It doesn't mean that I think people are evil. People are what they are, right? If me saying something like what Jordan Peterson says, which is, you know, part of my job as a psychology professor was convincing the students in my class that if they were adults in 1930s Germany, they would not have been, you know, freedom fighters and, you know, and the resistance. No, they would have been fucking Nazis. Yep. Right? And getting them to understand why and how that would be the case, right? Now, does that mean I think everybody's a fucking Nazi? No. Does that mean that I think everybody's evil? No. What it means is that I'm trying to take a realistic snapshot of what humans are, right? And say, you know, we have the capacity for a lot of frickin' things that we maybe don't realize. And you need to realize that you are capable of acts that you would consider evil. And you are also capable of performing those acts and then back rationalizing some good reason that allows you to justify it.
Okay, do you know what Nazis and the people involved in the Rwandan genocide and the people...
They all thought they were victims. They all thought they were victims.
And they all, like, even white people who own slaves, and some of the black people who own slaves, because that happened too, they all thought they were victims.
Yep.
And they all thought they were right. In fact, thinking that you are right beyond...
Righteous.
Thinking that you are righteous precipitates the worst atrocities of human history. So I don't know what kind of atrocity that Google is going to end up doing. Who knows? I'm sure it's going to be a fun ride.
Let's get out of here, then.
Yeah, www.feedthebadger if you want to give one time. We also have a link to Patreon if you want to become a patron and join us in the after show.